Okay, let's go. Welcome to Environmentally Sustainable Manufacturing, Phase 1, Module 1, where we're going to do an introduction to three-pillar sustainability. So in this module, we're going to cover the definition of sustainability, the three pillars of sustainability as a model, and then talk a little bit about a path from lean, so lean production, lean management, etc., to environmental sustainability. Which kind of puts this course into perspective, why it's in the flow that you guys take, and why it's in the very beginning. So I'm also going to serve to introduce the next module that we'll be talking about, which is the supply chain module. So all of this is a sort of a systems approach to how modern enterprise works. So we're today talking about the general concepts. So we're talking about basically describing the big overall system, the strategic aspect of the system. And then we're going to be zooming in and picking out piece by piece by piece from this overarching big system into its little itty bitty components as we go deeper and deeper. So, sustainability. For any word that means a lot of things to many people, I like to express or reach a consensus for a definition of the word. And this is primarily so that any information or discussion that happens after all involved parties have a common understanding of how the word is used in this particular context. So as we define it here, it's for our purposes and not necessarily saying that this is the end all or the definition that you have to use or should use or anything like that. No, it's so that that when you hear me use the word sustainability, you know what I'm talking about or you know how I perceive it. So, looking for common understanding. So, again, sustainability means many things, although similar to one another. So, if we look into a dictionary, for example, we'll find either that the ability to be sustained, supported, upheld, or confirmed. That's one definition that we can get from Webster's or dictionary.com or so. Another one would be the quality of not being harmful to the environment or depleting natural resources and thereby supporting long-term ecological balance. So that one is a lot more loaded. First one seems to be a more common dictionary approach. The other one is definitely closer to an environmental definition, which is a common angle or focus. The environmentalist groups, people, etc., they really like to use the word sustainability, and thus it usually, well, that means that there's likely definitions or interpretations of the word that is 100% towards sort of ecological or natural or environmental sustainability. Um, so, in regards to both of these, the first one is not particular specific. So, the ability to be sustained, supported, upheld, or confirmed, that is like to keep going, a word for to keep going. Um, not, it's not, it's too shallow. The quality of not being harmful to the environment or depleting natural resources, thereby supporting long-term ecological balance. Um, Too specific, I would say. Sustainability can be used or is used in describing a lot of things way more than just something that, something that could be sustainable. Uh, we have to be able to describe other things as well that is outside of just the environment. So let's look at what lean, for example, lean production how they would describe it. So they actually have a definition of sustainability in in published lean literature. So here we have a definition of sustainability that comes from Toyota itself. from a sustainability report, and they say that sustainability is the self-discipline of the organization or workers defined as do without being told. So this would be a very industrial perspective, and definitely from a company that's famous for their processes and process management, right? The self-discipline of the organization or worker. So I like that. Again, it covers multiple facets. We were talking about an enterprise or a company, but we are also talking about the individual, how this affects them, and that it's defined as do without being told. So, I mean, that's not a bad way to look at sustainability. Like, how do you sustain something? Well, if it comes naturally to you, it's something you do, you don't really have to reflect over it or teach somebody how to do it. That is definitely something I would agree with counts as sustainable. But again, just like we have to have this course, and we can't just settle with knowing lean. Um, it's very process specific, right? So coming from a company famous for their work with processes, here again we have a definition of sustainability that is in the very process focused, and that is too specific for what we need this to be. So, where does this word actually come from then? Like we so far we're through three definitions, and they're all very different. And I kind of mentioned this in the very beginning that there is a lot of interpretations why we're going through this mental exercise of defining it. So, the original source of the word sustainability, as it was brought into the perspectives of people, as we kind of would associate, that the average person would associate the word today, comes from something known as the Brundtland Report. And that was the origin of using the word sustainability as something to strive towards. Now, the word is older than that, and there's, I think that early, like it's been sources to like 1600s. There are books or publications from the 1600s that use the word, where they use it as sort of being able to sustain, being able to keep at something. But the associations that we make today comes from that Brundtland report originally. And another word for Brundtland report is, and I think it's a book as well, like it got published as a book, is Our Common Future. And it was published in the 80s, late 80s. And its targets, like this report was meant for multilateralism and interdependence of nations in search for sustainable development paths. So again, here we're using the word to describe the word, right? But yet again, they were the authors and the publishers were thinking of ways to try to capture concepts from the time that had a lot to do with things like overfishing and primarily environmental damage, right? So there was so it was kind of like trying to, how do we introduce environmental concerns in a constructive way to formal political processes or development. Like, how do we place environmental issues on the political agenda? And how do we do this while also talking about development? So it was the Brundtland report. It's kind of interesting if you read it from just sort of as a management, or if you read it sort of as a technical document to see what they're doing. They're trying to merge environmental concerns with development. And what do you mean by development? This is in nations building industry, building houses, people, buying new appliances, whatever it is, where like we're sort of, as our species moves forward, how do we bring environmental issues into it? That was one of the first sort of well published, well read, well polished attempts to, again, merge environmental concerns with development, like development work. Um, and it also, again, if you have the time and interest, it's not a bad document to read. And I'm not talking about reading and sort of memorizing, but sort of skimming through pretty fast or reading through it just to see where all of this kind of comes from. But it was a lot of sort of it also brought in sort of into one discussion things like senior government representatives, scientists, experts, research institutes, industrialists, representatives of non-government organizations, and the general public to have discussions around this topic of, again, development as like how do we push forward as a species but without damaging the environment. And that report defines sustainability as the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And this is actually a pretty decent way of describing sustainability to me, because it kind of it's open enough that it doesn't become obsolete, right? There's nothing that says here that like this is not gonna date itself too bad, and at the same time it's specific enough to actually help in narrowing down the definition. So the development that meets the needs of the present. Okay, so we look at what do we actually need around us, and whatever that is, we have to make sure that we don't compromise the ability of people after us to meet their needs, right? Now, the problem with this definition, though, is that we're, you know, how do we know what future people need? At one point, there was a Stone Age, and then it went into a Bronze Age, and went into an Iron Age. And the Stone Age people weren't like, well, in the future they're going to need bronze, or the Bronze Age people weren't like, well, this is a makeover until we get steel, or just the invention of transistors, or the digitalization that we're going through. All of those very difficult to guess. So that's an issue. Another problem is that we want to make sure that our definition is also not one of those where it's too loose, where we get analysis paralysis. And again, that is wide enough that we achieve actual sustainability, and it's highlighted here in this slide as actual, bold and leaning, which means that it's a loaded word. Well, you haven't told us what actual sustainability is. No, I have not. But at the same time, I kind of have by basically the process of elimination, going through various definitions. The Brundtland report, development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations, very defensive, very passive. It sort of says that you can do what you want as long as it's just like it's a restriction. Lean is forward pushing but too narrow. The dictionary ones are either too open, or again, like they're sort of negative. They're of like, why would you kind of thing, or be careful. They're not very forward facing. They're not very pushing forward, optimistic. So it's very important, and this is something that we have to decouple as well, which goes back to why we defined this word in the first place. This is not about ecology. It's not about trash in oceans, acid rain, making cornstarch-based plastics, and struggling, sort of like giving up. A good example. Recently, I traveled from Washington down to Arizona, and I was driving through Oregon. I stop and get a cup from a local fast food place, or a fast food chain, and making sure that I get like the largest meals, that I get the big plastic cup, right? Because that's going to act as my traveling cup of filling it up with water as I'm driving, for 24 hours straight. And they only have paper straws. So I end up going through a fistful of paper straws in order to use this cup multiple times for my water as I'm driving. Now, if it had been a plastic straw, I would have used one, and now it ends up being paper, so I use 10, so because they get soggy and they sort of fall apart. Um, and that's the thing. Well, that one was plastic, Carl. You shouldn't be using that at all. Like, of course, the papers are better because they have no environmental impact or any impact at all. So, of course, you can use 10 for the one, and we're still ahead, right? Well, are we? And that's the thing that we need to deal with here, because when we talk about just ecology, sustainability, or just that perspective, you're gonna notice that we're missing a lot of things. So, um, actual sustainability can't just be about environment, can't be just negative. Like do what you want unless, and it can't be too wide open. So, where are we at then? Well, I like to uh, define sustainability then. And from this point on, as we go through different modules and as we go into phase two, I will be talking about sustainability as an event, product, service, or process that we can perform indefinitely. That's my definition of sustainability. So any event, any product, any service, any process, any activity that an enterprise does, you should be able to perform it indefinitely. If you can do that, that is sustainable. And this could be from the perspective of a human, could be perspective from, again, a business, an organization, a country, whatever it is, a planet, any event, product, service, process. If you can perform that indefinitely, then you know you're sustainable. That means forever, indefinitely. I literally am talking perpetual foreverness, being able to do that. And this comes a little bit also from the changing the perspective. So you might say this is very close to the Brundtland definition. Yes, absolutely. I mean, it is based upon that definition. But what we've done here is that we're basically taking claim to that we are the future generation. And because that's one of those, like, it's too easy to brush off of, we're going to do something today for some strangers tomorrow. That's not going to be sustainable because, again, social engineering doesn't work. People will not see the relevance to that. And it's also not true. So we are actually the people that the Brundtland report is talking about in the future. What you do in your 10s or 20s could come back and bite you, does come back and bite you in your 60s and 70s, perhaps. So it's important to recognize that we're not talking about some distant, stranger people in the future. No, you're talking about your very self and your own enterprise, your own business in the very near future. And we can see examples of this that companies, for example, that do not have good sustainability work, that think about this kind of stuff, they will get burned on things that they did perhaps 10, 20 years ago when it comes to, content of their products or releasing things that were, or disposing of things in an improper way, and it does catch up to them very quickly. So this is, again, why sustainability is an important discussion topic for both companies, people, is because, again, a lot of people got burnt by it. But again, we're looking forward. We need to think about the future. So we need to cover financial and operational limitations as well. So that's another part of the sustainability aspect of, as you're pushing forward, you have to make sure that your financial and operational limitations are also taken into account, that you're careful or respectful of sort of the practicality and reality of the situation. So things like, should we not, let's say that we're a company, or let's say that you have a car. Um, is the reason for not using fossil fuels, should that be because you're running out of materials? Like one day we will run out of oil, so you shouldn't drive a car that has a internal combustion engine. Is that a great way to look at it? Or um, should we, we're making this product and we're trying to come up with we're basically trying to make a dietary product, so we don't want to have sugar in it because, sugar is, well, first of all, expensive. Second of all, also, it makes people fat. So we need to have an artificial sweetener that does none of those, so we come up with sucralose. Is that good? So two examples here, and they're both in the opposite end of the spectrum. Running out of materials for so like you shouldn't use fossil fuels because you'll run out one day is not a great way to think about it. It's not a sustainable way to think about it. And there's a great example. Now, who was it? I think it was one of the sheikhs from Dubai or Saudi Arabia, or so one of the oil influential nations that said that the Stone Age didn't end because they ran out of stones. Which I think is a fun way to look at it. Again, we're having that attitude where, like, well, this is a finite material and that's the only reason we shouldn't use it. It's a bigger picture than that. Like, perhaps it's because that you release captured greenhouse gases into the system too quickly, and the planet has a hard time balancing that. I mean, I think that's a better reason that it might run out. You have things like the extraction of it, what that does to ecosystem. Like, there's a lot of things, the business decision of sinking a lot of research and development into something that perhaps will run out, but it's not for the reason of it running out that we want to consider that to be a unsustainable option. There's more to it than that. When it comes to generating a waste product, there it might seem the opposite of that sucralose I have here as an example, which is an artificial sweetener. And supposedly right now it's unharmful to humans, unharmful to everything, because what happens is that if you consume something with sucralose in it, it'll taste the sweet, and then your body can't break it down, and it just goes through your body and it gets excreted with your business after it's sort of works its way through your body. And that might seem sustainable, right? Like, you're eating something sweet and it's not affecting you. But what happens is sucralose, fact that your body can't break it down is very bad, because that means that nothing can break it down. We're actually really good at processing things. Nature is really good at processing things. Like, one of the best solvents there are is regular water. And if there's nothing in nature, nothing in your body, nothing in nature that can touch sucralose, that means that all the sucralose we make is going to stay in the system. And if you think of this planet as a system, we're adding sucralose to it. It has nowhere to go. You're going to start having problems with things like that your groundwater becomes sweet because it has captured sucralose in it. So it's one of those where we did such a good job that there's no counterbalance to it. There's no way of getting rid of it in nature. Thus, it goes through your body, goes into the sewer system, goes into the groundwater, and there is trapped for thousands of years, and there's nothing naturally that can break it down. So there we have a problem where, can we perform this indefinitely? No, because we're going to be making the groundwater sweet. So to our system then, and to our definition, and again, these are two quick examples. We'll be talking more about this together as well. We'll be having discussions around this of what's sustainable and what is not and why. But before we get to that point, there's more things that we can add to this to sort of inform our discussions and sort of get to the point quicker, right? Is that to this sustainability definition, we need additional guidance. So the overall definition of sustainability is event, product, service, process that we can perform indefinitely. And to that, we're going to add a support in the form of three pillars. And those three pillars are the economic pillar, the environmental pillar, and the social pillar. And this is a model known as the three pillars of sustainability. Um, and we have them here on in sort of a graphical representation where the economic pillar is the business environment and economic health of the organization, the enterprise, you, the nation, whatever we're talking about, from a sustainability perspective. We have the environmental pillar, which captures sort of the green factors like the energy, pollution, emission, climate impact, things that affect the environment. And then we have finally the social pillar. And again, these don't come in any particular order because they're all equally important. We'll definitely talk about that. But then we have the social pillar that sort of measures and captures the social performance of our sustainability, how it affects people's quality of life. So, and these will look a little bit different. And again, why there's a whole course in this. We'll talk about how these pillars express themselves or come into play, or what they look like from different perspectives, like as you as a neighbor, your company, your nonprofit, your sports team, whatever it is, how these pillars express themselves. We'll talk more about that. So this model, again, commonly represented graphically in a variety of ways, from Venn diagrams to bullseyes, nestled within each other, sort of that the economic is the heart inside of a social, inside of an environmental, many different ways. And again, written, so as they define, as they break down sort of the text around that says, you see here in the arrows below the circles, what that text will say will be adapted or reflected by whoever is adopting or using this model. You'll also find that a lot of companies, international ones, big international ones, will actually have a sustainability report to give out each year. And all the successful companies, I would say, are working with a variation of three-pillar sustainability. But they will not perhaps call out social, environmental, economic. They might label them or name them after their own work. It's sort of exactly like how companies who are good at lean does it. They don't call it Toyota Production Systems. They will call it like General Motors Production System, or they will brand it so that it becomes their own work. And that's not just because you want to be 20% different to dodge a lawsuit. No, it has actually to do with that in order to make it yours, you have to make it yours. You have to basically work with it and come up with your own version of it. You have to practice this yourself. And so you'll find companies will name these pillars different things depending on to suit their. But again, the purpose of the pillars are the same. So they might talk about footprint, people, and God, what else would you say? Footprint, people, and stakeholders, perhaps, for the economic pillar, or development is another one. Or they might talk about human resources, climate impact, and future business, or so different ways of just describing the same three pillars. But again, to make sure that we cover our bases inside of each of these, so let's talk about each pillar by itself. So again, three pillars of sustainability. I'm going to beat this horse until it's an absolute dust pulp. The three pillars of sustainability, if we talk about the environmental pillar, if we look at it from a company perspective or enterprise perspective, because again, we are industry facing in mechatronics, engineering, technology, and automation. The most common one that gets the most attention again is the environmental pillar because, again, the push towards sustainability has been primarily in the environmental pillar. And we'll talk also a little bit about why that it's it's not good enough or why it's not working, right? You would think after, God, 80s, so we're at almost 4 decades, everything would have been fixed if that was enough, right? But again, we'll talk more about it. So again, the environmental pillar, the most common one that gets the most amount of attention. And inside the environmental pillar, examples of environmental work would be reducing the carbon footprint. And there's actually, super kudos to them. There are companies right now that have beat reducing carbon footprint, and they're actually at something that is um, at a carbon deficit. They're basically removing more carbon. So not only are their carbon footprint zero, they're actually negative, and they're removing carbon and putting that back into the ground, which is pretty cool. So again, if you're really good at 3 pillar sustainability, these are things that you will be able to get to. Can you go there um, from an only 1 pillar approach? We'll talk about that. So reducing carbon footprint or getting to a negative carbon footprint, packaging waste, water usage, recyclability as a measurement, sourcing materials, other emissions, the amount of electricity usage, things like that. All examples of environmental pillar metrics or currencies or things that we work in. And this is something also you're going to hear a lot in the coming weeks is currencies and metrics. We have the social pillar then. And this one, again, usually tied to poorly defined concepts, but again, a sustainable business should have the support and approval of stakeholders, employees, and the community that it operates in. So this is something that is important to keep in mind, that it's not only about the treatment and development of employees. Again, if we're talking from a enterprise perspective, but it's being a good participant in society, both locally and globally. So how is your company profiling itself in terms of the community where your offices and factories are located? How are you working with people as are you promoting scholarships? Are you sponsoring, athletic events? Are you building parks? Things like that. Your retention and engagement of current and future employees. That's another thing that we can see, that hiring, a common mistake that I see in the United States right now, common is that a lot of companies will set budgets for hiring, but they don't have any budgets for retention. So basically, once you're hired, then that falls out of their perspective, and instead they're looking at just, again, you keep a budget for hiring new people and covering positions, but you don't have a good budget for retention. So bonus systems and things like that would be an example of a retention system. But it comes back to, again, that if you're working in the social pillar, you're taking control of all of these things that has to do with people, community, and sort of perception, your social perception. And yeah, public outreach, placement of business, etc., etc., etc. So variations of this. And then the economic pillar, I think this one is the most well understood because it's the one that's gotten the most attention since arguably before the Stone Age. The economic pillar is one that has always been well developed, and the social pillar and the environmental pillar has kind of trailed behind. But a business needs to be profitable in order to be sustainable. And the economic pillar is where most businesses feel that they have a firm grasp, just because, again, we're a business. That means that our activity is to make money, is to be profitable, is to be competitive. But again, that's still hard enough that it requires us to look deeper. And so this is it's not only about making money. That is, profit at any cost is a hurtful stereotype or a misconception. That's not how successful businesses operate. They're looking for sustainability, things like compliance with laws, taxes, transparency across multiple regions, multiple countries. Has to do with governance structures. How do you represent the best interest of things like customers, but also shareholders, owners, um, all these different interests that has to do with how the company should run. Risk management is a huge one. So depending on, again, what your background is, some people would argue, I could make the argument if I want to, that business is all about risk management. It has nothing to do with knowing, production or anything. Like it's 100% just about risk management. Just like you can make the argument that is all 100% about change management. Like that's what a business actually does, and that just represents itself in different products and activities. But again, don't get too worried. Again, I'm going pretty broad here. This is the first module, and in the coming modules, we'll go more and more into this. And we'll build up our understanding as we go along. So don't be too worried about this. Managing investments. Again, if you want to have perpetual operation sustainability, you're gonna have to make investments continuously to sort of inject life into what you're doing. Conflict avoidance between board members. That in itself is an economic pillar activity. That takes up a lot of business, a lot of time. And then alignment between shareholders, management, etc. So again, here we can see, well, they kind of sound like social pillar issues, don't they? Like alignment between people, conflict avoidance. So yeah, no, those can typically be social pillar things. But again, this is things that exist in economic pillar as well, and that's something we're going to be practicing over the next couple of weeks. It's like, how do we tell, like, well, is this a social pillar thing? Is it an economic thing? It has to do with the same thing where, if we if we throw this into the woods, we dump this in the woods, we'll be fined $10 million. Now, is that an economic pillar or is it an environmental pillar? And that's why it's not hard as a concept to understand, but when it comes to practice, you have to practice it to make it yours. Just like in lean, which is why we'll contrast to that, because people are more used to that than 3-pillar sustainability. But it's the same thing there. It's not hard to, you can read Jeffrey Liker's book and understand Toyota Production Systems and the Toyota House and be like, oh yeah, that's nuts. I get it. And then when it comes to, well, now do it, completely different story. So again, you need to practice it, make it your own. And again, this 10-week course here is our introduction to starting to practice this mindset, but also starting to practice the activities that lead to a 3-pillar sustainable person, enterprise, etc. So, but again, keep in mind, an important thing to lift from this is that it's not about profit at any cost. That's not the purpose of the economic pillar. The economic pillar, just like all the other pillars, are looking for sustainability, profit at sustainability, in environmental presence sustainably, social presence sustainably. That's what we're looking for. So like these extremes, profit at any cost, or no pollution, or people first. Like no, like it needs to be sustainable. Sustainability in across all 3 pillars at the same time. So why should we do this? Well, good question. Caught me off guard there. No. So why we should do this is, I'll jump to the conclusion first, and then we'll build up to that conclusion. How about that? It's all about competitive advantage. If you, and especially we take the business approach, the enterprise approach to this, if you want to have a company today that is successful and that is going to stay around, right? Going back to the original definition of sustainability, you have to work with 3-pillar sustainability. It's the only way to stick around. It used to be, again, 4 decades ago. Let's talk about the time when the Brundtland report came out, late 80s. You could have a company that invented a product, or you could be a person that invented a product, if we talk about manufacturing, and you would be good. That product would sustain you for, the 10 years to come, 20 years to come, where through things like patents and and sort of technological supremacy. Like basically, you would have a method to make this that you patent and you protected it that way, or you had secrets that nobody knew, like how quite you do this, where the material came from. You would have things like, well, it was you invented a material first, and now you're using the application of that material, so you control the accessibility to being able to make more of it. A lot of things like this would, and that would be enough to have a single pillar, like an economic pillar, business that was doing great. Um, but and arguably there's also a social pillar aspect of it. If it's going to be bigger than one person, or you came from somewhere, if you are one person, somebody somehow you got training, somehow you grew up in a society that supported you, right? Or not supported as in that you got something free, but like electricity existed in the wall. There was roads, there was buildings, there was things, there was not a war going on. Things like that. Like there's enough social pillar activities going on that you were able to do this. Perhaps you got an education from somewhere, you got access to tools from somehow, and so the social pillar has its dues there. But again, like you could run an entire business based upon economic pillar activities only. That doesn't exist today. You don't have any advantage really over any other business. If we talk about sort of generally or across the board, everybody globally has access to the same tools, the same machinery, same knowledge. Again, it's a fantastic time to be alive where information is actually free. And I mean, you guys are experiencing an outcome of information being free, is that I'm talking to you across this media here instead of basically picking the time when you have to be there. So again, we can talk about that next, but if you come up with something super clever, like say a new product that is super clever, you have about 6 months to go through sort of the traditional loops of manufacturing, which is basically introducing to market, selling it, and coming up with a new version before, again, people lose interest or everybody else copies you and copies your success recipe, so that you're being droned out by people that have larger organizations and wider nets and access to people in a different way than you do. 6 months. So the average life expectancy is what it's called of a product is about 6 months. And again, you're not having any exotic materials or processes that not somebody else has access to as well. So it's basically the moment this goes live, there's a good chance that somebody can have a knockoff of your thing within 24 hours. How do you stay competitive? How do you achieve sustainability in such a climate? Well, it's all going to be in the margins. So instead of living off of a product for 10 years that you sell and support, you need to be your margin between what it costs you to come up with this thing and put it in the hands of the customer, and what you were able to charge the customer for, how big that gap is, that's your competitive advantage. That's where it's going to be at. So, and again, and we'll talk more about it. I bet you this is a lot of contentious things that I'm saying. That is going to be awesome discussions for when we meet during phase 2. But again, don't sit on your hands for this either. As I'm saying things, if you have questions, things that you're like, I don't agree with that, or I'm curious about that, or I want to add to that, don't hesitate. You can pause this video right now, reach out to me on Discord or an email and say, hey, and bring up what it is that you're thinking. Absolutely. But yeah, no, the information is available to everybody. Again, it's so hard to do something original. I would argue that today, as we are today, with now, especially with AI is combing through all the data that we have as a species, coming up with something original is almost impossible. You can only do interpretations. And again, what you can achieve is the best margin, better margins than everybody else. A lot of people make cars. They're heavily controlled by standards and things like that. So you cannot just make the most creative cars that you wanted. Like the late 50s were awesome, and what happens after that? Well, more regulation to to the point where all cars kind of look the same today because they have to stay within certain safety parameters and whatnot. So again, how do you make a how do you make a profitable car? Well, it's going to be in the margin of the car. The electric vehicles is kind of a little bit of a shakeup in terms of staking out a new market, but again, that's stabilizing so fast. Suddenly, everybody's making an electric vehicle, and it's going back to being in the margin. So, um, that again, it's all about the margins. So, how do you create good margins? Well, that's going to be across the environmental pillar. How do you make sure that you're not? And again, a lot of these things that we're going to be talking about is that we're never going to be anti something. Being anti things like I'm anti this or anti that, not allowed in my classes because it's counterproductive. It's basically it's unrealistic. How about that? You cannot be just against something. That's not how things work. You can be firmly for something. That means that by logical conclusion, that means that you're against something else. If you're all positive, you can't be negative at the same time. So, but instead of saying that you're anti-negative, you say you're for positive. So that's an important mindset that I highly encourage in people, and it's sort of the perspective that we take. When it comes then to the environmental impacts, we're making sure that we control all the parameters of what we emit, what we consume, and so in order to keep a good margin. Our social pillar, we take care of our people, our society, our community, because that has an effect on our margin. We have skilled people in a supportive community. That will be good for our margin because it means that we're being highly effective and efficient, and we're getting good people doing good stuff under our umbrella. And then the economic pillar, again, so well established that perhaps we don't need to talk about it. But this Venn diagram here, again, if you look, so here again an example: environmental, process, people. So here they don't call it economic, they call it process. And they've taken examples here of what happens when you combine, like the pillar on its own, combine two pillars with one another, and combine three pillars with one another, as an example. So if you combine the economic with people, you get loyalty, collaboration, interdepartmental teams, support structures. If you combine process or economic with environmental, you get alignment, effective with supply chain system thinking. So that one is a little bit, they're really scraping the barrel there, but I promise you we'll go over a lot of good examples what happens when you combine economic with the environmental. And then social and environmental, we have employee engagement, public communication, proactiveness, sustainability is viewed as an integral part of what makes an organization profitable, etc. And then again, combine all three of them. That's when you get that, like the super sauce, right? That makes you a business forever. One of those mega conglomerate that controls the planet. And again, like companies like we can give two examples here right now that are doing great: Toyota and Siemens. Great example where they've had this in the culture a little bit by accident, arguably, but again, they're result driven in a sense that they've noticed. It's sort of like they culturally they do it without actually having a model for it, control for it. Like nowadays, they definitely do. Look at examples, but already from their founding, like 175 years ago, they kind of hit the three pillars, arguably by accident or good instinct, right away, and sort of have been working across all three pillars, like prioritizing one or another or two, but they were still working on all three. So true sustainability can only be achieved when there's a balance between all three pillars. And a good example, an easy example I think everybody has had to listen to at one point or another or knows about, as we can start to see what happens when we start combining pillars. And also, again, how easy it is to misinterpret or not realizing what three pillar sustainability actually is. So if we talk about the first industrial revolution, the one in the 1700s, the one that we all go through in K-12, that they talk about, or at least in Europe, in K-12, they talk about Industrial Revolution, as well as the French Revolution, kind of in that same month or whenever it's gone through. Uh, Industrial Revolution happened in the 1700s, but could have happened sooner, and it also scarily enough could have happened later. What was it that caused it? And again, and you probably heard this during opening day, but what made the first industrial revolution an actual first industrial revolution? If you ask people, well, it was because of mechanical looms, steam engines, cotton gins, interchangeable parts, standardized work. A lot of sort of inventions led to, it's like there was enough significant inventions that it led to a boom in industrialization across countries or across regions. Yeah, so I mean, those inventions happened during that time and they were significant for the productivity. Again, one of those machines equaled the productivity of, hundreds of people. Uh, but that's actually not why. And then we have the stable environment where you could incorporate. That's another thing that, especially when you look at the Western European, um, at the time, like that the environment that existed. I mean, compared to today's standards, it was an absolutely dreadful, miserable time to be alive. If you survived childhood, you probably would be dead by early 40s, anyways. But in contrast, in the 1700s, late 1700s, when that first industrial revolution happened, Europe had just come out of a 100-year war and a 30-year war. So, and those wars were absolutely terrible during the mid 1600s to late 1600s. Uh, Europe was basically depopulated. It went from something like a population of 14 million down to 6 million. So basically, like a reduction of like 2/3 of the European population was killed in the 30-year war. And a lot of social misery and problems that came from that had ended, and in the late 1700s there was a relative stability, but sort of unheard for the times. So people had been able to move away from um, extreme misery to sort of a controlled environment that was stable, that you were able to be productive and constructive rather than looting, pillaging, and burning things to the ground to stay alive. So, I mean, and that could be a reason, right? There's also suddenly stable supply chains. So the Dutch, the British, Scandinavians, everybody is traveling between um, Asia, the Americas, and there's all of this activity that happens during the 1600s, 1700s that establish supply chains. And I'm not just talking about traveling to exotic places and bringing, spice back or silk or something like that. Those are all famous commodities that are luxury goods, or tobacco, or something like that, where like in the beginning those are just curiosities and consumables. Now I'm talking about things like bringing pitch from the Baltics to industries in England, or coal and steel being brought from mines in various European parts to organized steel mills and things like that. That you had established supply chains that were not being destroyed by war and or at the time, um, aristocracy, pettiness between aristocrats. Um, so you have stable supply chains. Maybe it was that. No, the reason you actually had an industrial revolution, the first one, why it happened, and why it also could have happened sooner or, scarily enough, later, was that for the first time in human history, as far as we know, you had a general population, not of a class or a clique of people, but a general population of workers. And what made them a worker? Well, the fact that they could do basic reading and writing and basic arithmetic, so adding, subtracting, division. They've been able to go to school to the point of learning to read and write their own language and doing plus and minus. That and having enough of those people meant that for the first time you could capitalize on something like a steam engine or a mechanical loom or so. You could organize a workforce. There was enough people that you could put them inside of a big building, and through collective collaboration and productivity, you could start making big leaps in productivity. That was the first industrial revolution. So for the first time in human history, we had a really strong social pillar and a really strong economic pillar at the expense of the environmental pillar. The environmental pillar took an absolute beating um, because of this, and as the industrial revolution goes into 2 and 3, the environmental pillar kept on taking a beating, and from time to time, so did the social pillar as well. And arguably also, if you look at the establishment of each pillar, uh, being a worker in the late 1700s, again, in contrast to today, that social pillar seems pretty weak. But if you compare where that social pillar was, 50 years prior to 1789, um, that pillar was weaker. Same when it comes to the economic pillars. So these pillars are constantly growing in height. The trick is to grow them all at the same time, same height, as we keep on growing them. So, um, and yeah, please, as at any time, if you need a breaker, so you can always pause this and write things down, or reach out to me, or just take a walk and pick this up again. This is one of the nice things about things being asynchronous. So it's a lot of talking and things that perhaps needs to be heard twice or never want to be heard again. It's you have the ability to control that. So with all of these things in mind, next thing I'm going to talk about is how do we go from lean to environmentally sustainable manufacturing. And you might have noticed now, well, if this course is about 3-pillar sustainability, which it is, why is it called environmentally sustainable manufacturing? That sounds like a very 1-pillar approach. And yes, it kind of is, but we'll talk about why. We'll grow into why manufacturing. Why do you lift that? Like because 3-pillar sustainability is an activity you should be applying to every aspect of your life. As one organization, no matter if you're manufacturing or not, every organization should have a 3-pillar sustainability mindset. So why manufacturing? And why talk about environmentally sustainable? We'll build up to that. But first, lean, going from lean to environmentally sustainable manufacturing. And this is kind of describing a little bit my own journey. Because again, this is something I'm personally a strong proponent of, you might have noticed. And I just feel like it's easy to back up with a lot of external sources. But my personal journey was from lean manufacturing and working with lean to basically taking that and pursuing 3-pillar sustainability or environmentally sustainable manufacturing. That's the journey that I did, and to me it makes a lot of sense, and it's something that is also very realistic if you want to implement this in industry, is that a lot of companies are already working with lean, or they at least know what lean is. And thus, if you want to start working with 3-pillar sustainability, this is a great segue from one to the other. That's a great way to do it. Because otherwise it can be difficult. Like, well, I understand the 3-pillar concept. It's really good. How do I do this, right? As a big strategic goal, and how do I get this into my organization? A great way to do that is to crosswalk it with already established lean practices, or looking at what lean does on a process level, and building upon that up to an entire enterprise or strategic level. So a couple of things. So this is going to be also a little bit of a revision of lean if it's been a while since you heard about it or worked with it. or or perhaps you're not too familiar with lean principles, I've sort of lifted out to me the most significant ones and how that actually is this, like how that exists in both lean and environmentally sustainable manufacturing. So the first lean principle, or sort of quote from lean, is base your management decisions on a long-term philosophy, even at the expense of short-term financial goals. This is something that's well established in lean, and it's a sort of a strategic thinking where you're willing to take small losses in the beginning because you're looking far ahead and you're realizing that by giving up little things here or investing little things here, we're going to get a big reward at the very end. Or we're going to recuperate our expenses at X multiplier profit. And it also talks about that this is management decisions. This means leadership, control, organizing segment of an enterprise, thinking long term, and coming up with good strategic plans that they're implementing. But if you look at the day-to-day activities, it looks like we're not making any money, right? That is a mindset in an organization that you have to have in order to do three-pillar sustainability. Because again, the ramifications of your three-pillar work is far ahead. And this was one of those cool things about, like Toyota and Siemens, for example, that started hundreds of years ago, was that they treated their employees just a little bit better than their peers for the time. So it's not like in 175 years ago they treated people like we would expect them to treat a person today. But they sort of started that where we're going to treat people a little bit better than currently. And we're going to keep on pushing. Like, how do we keep on treating people better? Like, how do we bake this into our activities? For example. And that's what I was talking about earlier. That's that cultural mindset in the organization that is three-pillar work before three-pillar work was even a concept, which leads to them being successful. And again, so this lean principle here is a key to also doing environmentally sustainable manufacturing. So what's the difference then? Well, again, in lean, we're talking about process-driven things. So you're taking that very same statement and now you're applying it across three pillars. So you look at your long-term philosophy, not goals, not objectives, but philosophy. So you develop a philosophy and you make management decisions based upon three-pillar perspectives in the long term, and you know that this is going to cost you short term, but again, you know how this is going to affect your margin, or you bank on it. This is going to affect your margin further ahead. It's like any company today that invested in carbon capture technology, 15 years ago. Suddenly, when they roll out that you have restrictions on how many emissions that you can produce, you're already at a point where you can now make money off of running your factories because you're not only carbon neutral, you're carbon negative. So other companies can pay you because you're negative. That was not that hard to see, for example. That's something that a lot of companies did, and that's based upon this statement here. There's also, again, investing in your workforce. Look at a company's turnover, how many people come and go, and how long somebody stays. A lot of successful companies have people that have worked there for decades, like 10, 20, 30 years. People have built entire professional lives inside of one company. So again, there you can tell like there's definitely something going on here between the social pillar and the economic pillar in this particular company. And again, it comes back to this, like, you're thinking long term. How do I use this person as an asset? How do I use this person as, again, it's a particular process within my company that I invest in, that I do preventative maintenance, that I take care of it, that I, keep it busy. All part of this statement. Add value to your organization by developing people and partners. So it is, again, comes from lean production. Grow leaders who thoroughly understand the work, live the work, live the philosophy, and teach it to others. Develop exceptional people and teams who follow your company's philosophy. Respect your intended network of partners and suppliers by challenging them and helping them improve. Again, all of this lean does, but it's process focused. You establish philosophy, goals, objectives, and we'll talk more about those things as well. Metrics for your 3 pillars sustainability work as an organization. You use these same mechanisms to promote and establish the work within these 3 pillars. And what's the perspective? Again, if lean is process focused, 3 pillars sustainability is organization encompassing. It basically covers your entire enterprise and anything that touches it. Nothing is assumed, everything is verified. This is very important, and it also goes back to, because you might start thinking, so okay, so why 1700s was a long time ago? Why now? Why did it take this long for me to hear about 3 pillar sustainability, or why is this being pushed on me now and not like why hasn't this already been established before my time, or why did it take so long for me to hear about it? I'll mention that as well, and that's something we'll be establishing as well. And that goes back to also why this is a course in the very beginning of you guys' journey or path inside the program. But nothing is assumed, everything is verified. Go and see for yourself to thoroughly understand the situation. The Genshi Gimbutsu from Lean. Make decisions slowly by consensus, thoroughly considering all options. Implement decisions rapidly. That middle one, make decisions slowly by consensus, I think is another basically definition of sustainability in itself. But again, we have to have the aspect of being able to add time to it, right? We can't only have what we're doing, but also what we're doing over time. Become a learning organization through relentless reflection. Hansei, basically look at yourself and describe what you see productively, but also honestly. And then continuous improvement and basically never stopping, the Kaizen work. All of these are excellent things and sort of what you will do and what you have to do when working with 3 pillar sustainability, which now you might be asking yourself, so the reason that lean works is not because it's lean production. Like you're saying that it's not just about reducing the wastes, which I mean again is important from an environmental pillar, but lean is successful because it accidentally or without expressing so is working on 3 pillar sustainability on the process level and local level. Yes, that's exactly why lean is so effective and why it works, or when you do it right. Why it works is because lean production is 3 pillar sustainability on a very local, very process leveled, So it's the same thing. It's just that you want to take this beyond the process. You want to use it, and also you want to aim this. Lean accidentally, arguably, accidentally stumbled upon 3 pillar sustainability while only expressing their economic pillar desires. There's really nothing in lean that talks about why you should work on the environmental or the social pillar. They talk a lot about the economic pillar, why that is important, but they never solely express like we're doing this for the social pillar only or the environmental pillar only. It's sort of between the lines, or it becomes an output like it's good for business to be nice to people. That's sort of how lean would phrase it. Or it's good for business to take care of your supplier. Don't harass your supplier. Don't be mean to them. Don't take advantage of them. Because money is how Toyota Production Systems or lean expresses it. But that's the reason that it works is because it's actually a form of 3 pillar sustainability without being aware. And this is also why it's so important to work with this, to raise the awareness of 3 pillar sustainability, is that it needs to be conscious decision. Otherwise, you're leaving too much up to chance, and you're going to have a hard and ineffective time. So next, map the activities that add. So basically what you notice here, I'm going through basically a summary of all of lean, and you're going to notice that if all of it fits straight into 3 pillar sustainability. Map the activities that add value to the product and getting rid of non-value adding activities. So the 3 M's, muda, muri, mura. So waste, like the 7 or 8 wastes that we look at reducing, overburdening people and machines, unevenness, too much or too little. All of those comes back to having pillar consequences, both economic pillar consequences, social pillar consequences, overburdening people, machines, unevenness has a social impact, but it also goes back to environment, right? Like we're wearing things out, we're breaking things. That means that they need to be, at best, right, recycled or repurposed. At worst, it goes into landfills, or we're consuming more oils, lubricants, things like that, because we're improperly using machines. All, all applicable in our 3 pillar work. And then huge one that is huge for so many reasons. This is one of those that are worth tattooing on your forearm as a mechatronics engineer. We don't know what we don't measure. So in Lean, we prioritize people and teamwork, learning by doing, seeking out challenges rather than results. This is another, like, one early criticism of Lean was how do you do, how do you fit creativity and innovation into something that is based upon continuous improvement loops and like standardization. Lean is like you have to standardize, then you do a continuous improvement loop, and you standardize. Like how do you do innovation? That part of that is seek out challenges rather than results, and that's again also how do you get good at 3 pillar sustainability? How do you push all 3 pillars at the same time? So that you seek out challenges. And we will talk more about all of these because accumulate facts, get the whole family involved, base decisions upon facts. Like all of these come back to you don't know what you don't measure. So we need to capture an immense amount of data from every activity that we do. And then from that data, we look for economic impacts, social impacts, and environmental impacts. Or as we seek out challenges across 3 pillars, the data is what provides the information, that provides the knowledge, that leads to the fact or the wisdom that allows us to realize that this is a long-term good thing that we're aiming for. Lean also has tools to describe things as value-added activities that are good ones. We have incidental waste and pure waste. This is also a great tool that works in categorizing your activities from a 3-pillar sustainability. Like there's activities that are going to be in the green, are going to be ones that are in the yellow, which means that they're not good, but we're kind of stuck with it until we have something better. And then they have red activities that basically need to stop immediately as we learn about them. So, a couple of things then that to start summarizing Lean. We don't know what we don't measure, and in Lean you kind of look for economic targets or wastes. When you transfer this to environmentally sustainable manufacturing with 3-pillar sustainability, there's a lot that you need to measure because we base decisions upon facts. So data leads to information, that leads to fact, that leads to good decisions long term. Lean talk about people live in the TPS house, at the Toyota Production Systems house. I didn't include a visual here, but a common way to represent Lean work is a house with a foundation, pillars, and a roof. And and its philosophy is the foundation, the pillars that are different tools that hold up the roof, which is things like quality and good products and whatnot, profitability. And Toyota expresses this, or the Lean expresses this model as like this house that is based upon the production system, production processes. Purpose of this house is that people live in houses. So the people, the organization, thrives inside this house. Again, social pillars. But again, Lean never expressed the 3-pillar aspects of it. They always expressed the reason is money. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's honest, actually. But we're going to take a deeper control of all 3 pillars on purpose, again, to get stinking rich forever. So perpetual success is something that Lean cares about, while we care about sustainability. And they're arguably the same thing, but sustainability is, again, a concept that is bigger than just success. It's being able to be successful forever. So it adds time to success. So, what is the connection between environmental sustainability in manufacturing and lean production? Sustainability in manufacturing and lean production. Well, again, to pulp that horse into powder, um, they're exactly the same thing. Or lean is accidentally doing environmentally sustainable manufacturing, um, or has all the tools for it. But we're growing the perspective and we're applying it now like across the entire system instead of just a sequence of processes. So how are they different then? And again, I've answered this, but I'm just to make sure that the horse is really dead. Lean is a very local view and process oriented and came about by accident. It was economic work only, and then very logically so, they figured out the relevance of other things to that economic pillar. So if lean got so close, why? So why three pillar sustainability then? Well, we kind of have drummed pretty hard on why the three pillars. Like, well, it's the only way to be sustainable. But what does that actually mean? Why not two pillars? Why not four pillars? Why not eight pillars? Why not like 600 pillars? Why the social, economic, and environmental pillar? And I mean, if you look around, do some research, you will find that there is actually a model that is four pillars. While the fourth pillar being human or humanity. So you would have human, social, environmental, economic. I personally think that is redundant and bloaty. Um, you'll hear the same argument talking about Industry 4.0 versus Industry 5.0. My take on that will always be, again, what's the now I introduce things, so I should explain what they are. Basically, Industry 5.0 is the same as 4.0, but they're saying that we need to take humanity and human skills, people skills into perspective because of the automation from Industry 4.0. My argument is that everything we do as a species is for humans and for humanity. That's one of the reasons that we're having problem with the environmental pillar is that we prioritized us as a species and didn't really take care of things like, I don't know, like penguins or polar bears or something like that. So that fourth pillar is redundant. The three pillars are for humanity. We don't need to add humanity as an extra pillar. That's not how these systems work, according to me. So, why wasn't anybody doing this before? Why wait until 2022 or 21? Or actually, I think first time around this class was 2020, and I didn't invent this concept, although we're one of few that are three pillar sustainability centric. First of all, the three pillar model has no clear origin. Instead, the three pillars of sustainability is kind of have come up over time gradually, usually through economic, environmental, and social critiques of each other's pillars. So the environmental pillar will criticize the economic will criticize the social will criticize the environmental. So, basically from critique comes a sort of a distillation that leads to the three pillar model. And again, as people been doing it, as organizations been doing it and being successful, they've sort of distilled out these three pillars, and that's why they might have different names. So if you come up with this organically, they might not be called economic, environmental, and social, but they will still be those pillars, but they have different names if you organically develop this in-house, which does happen. And again, I like this model because to me it's a complete aspect of life. You cover the social aspects, that's you as a person, you as a human, things that are important to you personally. You have the environment. Well, we all exist in an environment, like the air that we breathe, the meadows that we walk in, etc. Now, but the environment is things like, it's not just like trees and oceans. These are cities, these are parks, these are any environment. Like, I mean, there's pigeons and stuff that live in cities too. There's ecosystems across all kinds of terrain. Arguably the Arctic is a depressing place to be because it's just snowing again. In a seal here and there, or a nice, polar bear or a penguin, whatever. But that's still in an environment needs to be taken into consideration. So covers that, and then the productive enterprise, your professional persona, the enterprise, the business covers that as well. And if you think about it, like every activity from the morning, like from the moment you wake up to you go to bed and the sleep in between, there's nothing really outside of those three perspectives. Like we're not missing anything. It covers our entire existence as individuals, as enterprises, um, as people. So again, why the person or human pillar is unnecessary, because again, the three pillars here is from the perspective of humans. If we care about something in an environment, we're not doing it from the environment's perspective, we're doing it from our perspective. Like we're like, like let's be real here. If we talk about saving tigers from extinction, we're not doing that from the tiger's perspective or so. Like we're actually engineering it to that we just like we controlled the demise or caused the demise, we're trying to control the keep or the persistence of the species. So again, it's all from the perspective of humanity, which is good because nature. If you leave the environmental pillar unchecked, nature is a cruel place. So we do need to keep that pillar in check. Uh, so again, it covers all aspects. I like that. Another really good thing about why three pillar sustainability is it has the awesome ability that I personally look in like any concept, method, tool, um, workflow that I introduce to you. Uh, I try to make them, or I look for things that have this mechanism in them that makes them self-correcting. And the mechanism here is that it doesn't really matter if you believe in three pillar sustainability or not, if you measure the three pillars or not, work with them or not, like acknowledge them, they will still be there and be true. So your ignorance, my ignorance, or our, if we put on our blinders, pretend that they're not there, they're still there and they're still happening, and that we cannot control. So what we have to basically actively work with them to try to take control of them. Um, Otherwise, they will still be there and they will affect us randomly or even worse, negatively. Um, and that's a great concept, tool, method, or so. That is, it doesn't matter what you think or not. It's still true. So you might as well take possession of it or utilize it because it's there, and it's if you don't, then again it's going to be rolling dice or always be a negative outcome for you until you take control of them. So that's great, and that's why another reason why this is a important an important mindset, an important philosophical thing to implement in your professional persona. So, um, so as we're going through this, and as you're listening to this, you're looking at this, I want you to really start thinking about the answer to these questions, and I will give you alternatives or sort of my interpretations, or one, like again, there is no finite answer, yes or no. 4.3. Why now? Why did three pillar sustainability not become a thing 50 years ago, and where you start seeing enterprises being successful in it? Or were they? Is it? Has it been ongoing? Again, like I talked about Toyota and Siemens and them being around for hundreds of years. And one of the reasons that that's the case is because they've kind of been working on this, although never recognizing it and making a conscious effort to work on all three pillars. Think about that. Why now? Why not 50 years ago? I also want you to think about what does this have to do with Industry 4.0 and manufacturing? Yes, we can make profitable manufacturing, do profitable manufacturing if we do this. But why, you know, like what is the actual link here um, between why now, why not 50 years ago, and what does this have to do with Industry 4.0 and manufacturing in the first place? Because I would make the argument, even if you're never going to set foot in a factory or work with manufacturing, taking this course is paramount for anybody that's interested in doing any activity any enterprise activity on this planet. We'll try to build up for that as well. Um, so an example of answers or things that sort of can, in the ways you can think about this. So why has it taken so long to actually work with 3 pillars, or look for sustainability across all 3? Short answer: extreme complexity. That would be my answer to that. Extreme complexity. It's very seldom, and again, if we can talk about examples from the 16, 17, 1800s, terrible times if we look at it from a lens or perspective of today. At the same time, that is a false way to look at it, where we have to be careful. It's very seldom that you encounter actual maliciousness in people and in an organization. That, especially when we talk about groups of people. So when you look at the collapse of a pillar, like any of them historically, it is usually never due to extreme maliciousness from a particular person or organization where they're doing it just to be spiteful and mean. Instead, you'll usually find things like ignorance, not knowing any better, not understanding perspectives, not realizing what the effect of this is. A good example of a collapsing social pillar is that the Kingdom of Spain. Again, we were talking medieval, from 1200s to 1700s. Spain treated their Jewish minority extremely poorly, to a point of expelling all Jews in the Jewish religion from Spain, which led to an extreme economic depression that the country of Spain today, not the Kingdom of Spain, so we're talking again 1600s, 1500s, 1600s, Spain persecuted and were so terrible to its Jewish minority that they all left, which put them in economic recession that they still, as a country today, hundreds of years after, have nothing really in common with the people to people, and they're still suffering the consequences of this decision that happened so long ago, which is kind of interesting to see. So again, you had a persecution and a negative move in the social pillar that just absolutely devastated the economic pillar. And that's why I'm talking about. You need to take control of all 3, work on them, because they're interlinked no matter if you want them to be or not. But so that ignorance and again, was that maliciousness? Well, I mean, on the individual level, yes, or it doesn't matter. That was terrible. But it comes to that ignorance again of thinking that one religion versus another, or the difference in people, and that basically being a village idiot led to extreme consequences. And it's not necessarily that it was just to be mean, but it was out of things like fear, arrogance, ignorance, etc. Another one is complacency, that you do not do anything different because there's not really any reason. There's no urgency to do anything different. And this complacency is something we see a lot in the coming out of World War II, for example, is that things are not that bad, so we're just things are working well enough that we don't really it ain't broke, don't fix it. And that comes again from a very local perspective. It's you're just well, we're going to do what we're always going to do. And that leads to also another aspect of why it's taken so long, is tribalism. Well, we've always done it this way. We don't want to change because that's change in itself. I don't like it, which is a very human attribute, very human perspective, is that you have this complacency, or again, just hostility towards doing things differently, because we're creatures of habit, right? We have habits and we don't want to question them. So it's taken that long because you have to get to the point where you realize that it hurts so much that you have to break away from ignorance, complacency, and tribalism. And that's where we're at now, where again, a lot of businesses realize that you don't have a choice. We have to work with 3 pillars of sustainability in order to move forward. Otherwise, we're stuck and we got a business. And people are also realizing this on an individual level, that I should take these into account. That makes me happier. I can't just have a job for the economic pillar. I have to have it from a social aspect as well. And what does my environment look like, and what environment do I find myself in, and what effect does other things have on that? Like we're at a point where we kind of have to, and that's taken some time. Another aspect of it is, for the first time in human history, due to that complexity, we can actually do something about it. And that's been a big thing as well, where, it's easy to talk shit about people who lived hundreds of years ago. But uh, even if they knew the true power of three-pillar sustainability, if they understood, which they most likely did, again, the human brain has been the same size for at least 300,000 years. We're not any smarter or dumber than we've been for the last 300,000 years, which is kind of scary if you think about it. But it like even if you're sitting there in 1703 and you know damn well the true power of three pillars sustainability, it's taken up until today for us to develop the tools to actually do something about it. And that's why this links well with Industry 4.0, because Industry 4.0 is the first time in human history that we have the tools to deal with the complexity of three pillar sustainability, because it's not a linear relationship with these three pillars. Like you can't, like if you do something in the profit or the economic pillar, let's say we take 2 steps up, that might raise social and environmental. You take another 2 steps, you try to replicate that. Your social jumps 1 and the environmental drops 4. Then you take another 2 steps and now the inverse. Like it's a non-linear relationship. And 4.0 is the first time where we have the tools to actually see patterns in non-linear systems. And we'll talk more about that as well. So, that is sort of the end of this module, which is basically just, importantly enough, establishing the definition of sustainability and our three pillars and that model. So we've sort of set the stage for the 3 pillars of sustainability. Next up, again, I talked about this being a big ball, and we're describing the strategic aspect of this ball. Next module, we're going to talk about supply chains. So we're going to be looking at and caring a lot about the gathering of natural resources, first of all. And then secondly, we're going to look at the path from resource to our customer's customer. So not just our customer, but the customer after that. And then disposing of, first, packaging, sort of you unbox the product that we made. And secondly, the product at the end of its life cycle. This is known as PLM, product lifecycle management. But specifically also how this relates to supply chain management. Like what do these two have in common? How are they different? So we're going to talk about why we have this entire perspective, and importanter, how you keep this perspective. So we took the overall strategy. Now we're zooming in a little bit, which ends up with being us in relationship to a long chain of events, a supply chain. That's going to be the next thing. So my recommendations then for next week is that there's a reading. It's an assignment here, but I'm not gonna enforce you reading this. I basically suggest or urge you to read this: The Sustainability Transition in Industry 4.0 in Smart Manufacturing with a Triple Layered Business Model, Canvas. It's an article, and it's and the article is posted on Canvas as well. So read that. It's about an Italian company that does 3 pillar sustainability work, and it's kind of an interesting read there because it's kind of, they end up being able to do so by also becoming an Industry 4.0 company. So again, kind of by accident, kind of by different incentives for different reasons, they pursue 2 things at the same time: Industry 4.0 technology, 3 pillar sustainability. They end up finding that they enable each other. But there's a lot of good stuff to lift out from that article. It also gives you guys an ability to look at an actual application for Industry 4.0 technology, but also how a company actually actively does three pillars sustainability. So please read that article. It's on Canvas. These slides are also on Canvas for you to use as reference material if you like. And again, if you have any thoughts, comments, questions, concerns, reach out to me either during the workshop times for MEC 310, which is the workshops for this class, or the collaboration hours is 7:30 to 11:30 on Mondays. But you don't have to wait for that window. Again, if you want to, that window I am sitting by the computer actively monitoring, waiting for you guys to pop in, and if you want to talk about anything or work on anything together. But just fire off an email or a message on Discord. And it's like, hey, comment or question, or I want to talk about this, and I'll gladly take you up on it. So also, gain access to the school databases ProQuest and EBSCOhost. So the school library has these databases with published articles that are usually behind paywalls otherwise. Gain access to those. So the next slide here in the slide deck has a link to the library, and go talk to Pearl. She's absolutely awesome. She's our faculty librarian. And make sure that you gain access to these ProQuest and EBSCOhost, because you can search there and look for published works on different concepts, models, data collections, whatever it might be, to deepen your knowledge into these things. So, I mean, like Googling and using YouTube is kind of ghetto for some things. So having that as an additional resource, very valuable. I also want you, for next week, for the following weeks, is to start thinking about what belongs to each pillar and how different entities express the three pillars. So again, we talked about a company perspective, an individual's perspective, a municipality's, like Pierce County's perspective on three pillar sustainability. How would each of these different entities, organizations, people express three pillar sustainability? Because they will do that, so they will do so differently. Or a car maker versus a restaurant. How do they express three pillars sustainability? Start thinking about that and see it as a challenge. Challenge yourself that if you're in charge of any of these, how, or all of them, how would you express three pillars sustainability, or each pillar, what would it look like from that perspective? So read that article, start thinking about these things, and reach out to Pearl to make sure that you gain access to that EBSCOhost and ProQuest. That's it for this module. Thank you very much.